Holy City Center Radio is episode 407, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Wednesday, September 10th, 2025. What's up, everyone? I hope you had an awesome weekend and your week is off to a good start. Everything is good here. Glad to be back with you. If you're looking for plans, holycitycenter.com/calendar is where you need to go. But if you're just looking for the latest news, just go to the main website itself. You can see the top stories right there, but then also you can click over to categories if you're just more interested in checking out, say, food and bev stuff only or politics only. You probably already know it's the place to go, but just in case you forgot or haven't visited in a while, why don't you click on over there? Nothing else going on, so that's why I'm doing this shameless self-promotion, but I won't delay any longer. Let's get into the latest news. So a subcommittee of the state's Senate Medical Affairs Committee will meet to discuss Senate Bill 323, which would completely ban abortion in South Carolina. As you may know, South Carolina basically already has a total ban, but there are some exceptions. Obviously, there's the fact that I called it basically a total ban for those familiar with it. Even those exceptions, sometimes there's just so little time before decisions can be made that it feels like a total ban. Now, that's how it is now. But if this bill goes in, those exceptions are gone. So they're calling it the Unborn Child Protection Act. As I tend to say, these bills are named by the people who put them forward. So they are meant to evoke certain emotions. So when people are like, hey, do you support the Unborn Child Protection Act? If you say no to that, you sound like a monster if you don't know the details of it. So that's what the people who put it forward are calling it. But yeah, it would eliminate the state's current exceptions for abortions. And those current exceptions include rape, incest, and fatal fetal anomalies. Yes, all three would no longer be exceptions. We've talked about it before. I don't want to dive into it much more. I mean, we've talked about this a million times, just how cruel that would be in many circumstances, putting aside the fact of bodily autonomy and taking away decisions from women, that's all part of it as well. But at least it seemed like there was some sliver of a heart with these people where they carved out some exceptions. Again, not saying we should be thankful because this is not what we used to have in place, but this would eliminate all of those. Those already traumatic experiences for varying reasons could end up being far worse for the women and or children involved. So the bill would also, by the way, we're not done yet. The bill would also make abortion a felony in South Carolina, meaning women who terminate their pregnancies could face criminal prosecution. Yes, we've seen these other laws be floated in other states and even here where, oh, no, we're not going to criminalize, the abortion. If a woman gets it, she's not going to be in any trouble. And then we've seen things get passed where, well, no, that's not actually the case. This one is outright is putting it out there like, yes, 100%. Not only will we come after you, it's a felony. In addition to that, doctors who perform abortion procedures could face up to 30 years in prison. Current state law, the so-called fetal heartbeat law, says that after a heartbeat is detectable, abortion is no longer an option. As we've talked about ad nauseum before, the bill doesn't make any sense from a logical or medical standpoint. It's not actually a heartbeat at 6 weeks, which is generally, the understood that there's like electrical impulses that, seem like a heartbeat. And eventually, yes, as things continue, there will be an actual heartbeat, but this is not a heart. And again, you could don't go back to other episodes. You can look it up online. You'll get, the factual basis behind this from someone who, directly instead of just hearing it from me. So again, putting all that aside, because there's nothing we can do about that at the moment. This is something that could happen, as unlikely as it seems. A spokesperson for the ACLU of South Carolina called the bill, quote, unconstitutional and deadly, end quote. And they went on from there to discuss why they believe that, how how they determined, no, this is unconstitutional and can lead to deadly consequences. There's a link in the show notes. They also released their own statement that you can find out there as well, not just on their site. I posted it on holycitycenter.com. So if you're wondering, what can I do? According to the agenda for this medical affairs committee, they will meet on October 1st. That is when they were expected to start discussing this bill. So with the subcommittee, there's some discussions, ultimately a vote whether to move it to the, in this case, would be the Senate. Sometimes subcommittees vote to move it to the House, depending on where the bill came from. This would move it to the Senate, where then it would come up for debate. And then we start that whole process that you're probably familiar with, where if it's then passed by them, it goes to the House. They either pass it or add some changes, and then it goes forward or not. So very early in the process, but let's nip this in the bud right now. October 1st, public testimony and expert testimony will be heard. We have seen in the past that neither of those necessarily guarantee anything, but it's important to be heard. So there'll be, I'm sure you'll see all sorts of petitions from the organizations you tend to hear from. When it comes to this issue, there's already some out there. There'll be information posted about, how to sign up for the public testimony. So stay tuned. More is forthcoming. Feel free to look up all this on your own and see what is already out there in terms of, if there's any petitions or calls to action, or if you just want more information. But this is a very real thing that is going to be discussed October 1st at the State House. So definitely be aware of it. I know there's some people say, look, it's not going to happen. Even the most hardcore right-wing people are not going to let this move forward. But don't listen. Let's not leave it to chance. We see what leaving things to chance sometimes does. We've seen conventional wisdom would lead you to believe that, no, it doesn't work anymore. So we have to be active and make sure this does not happen. The lawsuit that was naming Taco Boy on Folly Beach as a defendant in the tragic 2023 DUI crash that killed newlywed Samantha Miller has been formally dismissed. Specifically, you may remember there were multiple restaurants and other parties that were sued in the wake of this accident, claiming that they held some liability in this DUI crash. So some places have paid out settlements already. Taco Boy did not want to pay out a settlement, and they said, we don't belong in this lawsuit. And it appears the courts agreed with them, as they have been formally dismissed from that lawsuit. A spokesperson for Taco Boy said that they are relieved that this matter has been resolved, and the facts have exonerated Taco Boy and our team. And yes, they did go on to say that their hearts remain with Eric Hutchinson's family as they continue to heal from this unimaginable tragedy. So for those who need a quick refresher, back on April 28th of 2023, there was this tragic accident that happened on Folly Beach when Jamie Lee Komorowski was driving under the influence. And yes, she has been convicted, so we can say that this is not an alleged thing, and we'll get to that in a moment. She crashed her car into like a golf cart type vehicle that was carrying newlyweds Samantha Miller and Eric Hutchinson, along with two other family members. The crash ultimately, as I mentioned before, resulted in the death of Miller, who was just 34 years old at the time, and she was still wearing her wedding dress, as her and Hutchinson had gotten married earlier in the day. Hutchinson was left with severe injuries, including a brain injury and multiple broken bones. The other two passengers also sustained injuries, less serious, thankfully, on their end. Ultimately, after normal working through the courts and all this other stuff. It took over a year, but in December of 2024, Komorowski pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including felony DUI resulting in death, 2 counts of DUI causing great bodily injury, and 1 count of reckless homicide. She was then sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the sentences for the charges to run concurrently. So, yes, after this accident, we've talked about this before, because there are these liability laws, which make sense in some form, but also we've seen how they can be problematic. But there's these liability laws where if there's an accident or anything really that involves a person who is drunk, and if that person who is drunk is found to be at fault, the other parties can sue not just the person who, in this case, for instance, Komorowski was charged with DUI. She had been driving drunk. And so, yes, there's the legal process, the criminal process for her, but also civil. They can sue that person, but they can also sue businesses where that person consumed alcohol. And ultimately, if they are found to be at fault in the sense of, like, they should have cut this person off, they should have assured that they had a ride home, were they reckless in serving this person? And we've talked about how that liability law, number one, we've talked about the insurance rates and how high they are because of it, and the multiple reasons for that. But also the fact that a restaurant who may have 1% liability, if any, will be found just as much at fault as, the restaurant that wildly overserves someone. So there's been talks about changing all that. That's part of this story as well. But the main point here is that Taco Boy is dismissed from the lawsuit, which means a few things. There was no evidence that Komorowski drank at their establishment. They had like an employee appreciation event. And Komorowski said that, number one, she didn't drink there. She didn't feel like she was pressured to drink. That was like some accusation early on, that, oh, yeah, this was a party where, employees are encouraged to drink and, that kind of thing. So it appears that, there was no basis in fact, at least that were found in the court. So, it's rare that I see a restaurant get dismissed, a bar get dismissed from these types of lawsuits. Because again, if there's any indication that the person drank there, even if it's just one beer and it was their first drink of the day, they can still be found liable. If no matter what they do, hours later, they're getting trashed in some other bar, you have that same liability as that last one, which is wild. But anyway, getting off the topic, but just this story has had so many, parts to it. But obviously the most important, is the tragic loss of Samantha Miller and what Eric Hutchinson and all the whole family, both sides, and the friends have had to go through. This is one of those, I think, last kind of remaining things that was out there, is I believe all the other lawsuits have been settled. And now that Komorowski's in jail, hopefully this is just another step in the process to help them move forward and continue to heal. Another lawsuit was dismissed, and it made some headlines here in South Carolina. A federal judge on Monday dismissed a lawsuit filed by the South Carolina NAACP and several individuals. The lawsuit included the aforementioned NAACP, a teacher, students, a librarian, and an author who had challenged South Carolina's restrictions on public school classroom content. Federal Judge Sherry Lydon said in her ruling that the plaintiffs did not have the legal standing required to move forward with the case. So you may remember that this dispute centers on a budget proviso, which is just like a line in the state budget. You have the state budget, different things can be added to it, even though they sometimes seem like they're not related to the budget at all. But anyway, there was a line in the state budget that prohibits using state funds to teach that one race or sex is inherently superior to another. Yes, we're talking about the whole CRT panic that happened last year, 2 years ago, however many years it's been. And although on the surface it sounds like, well, right, yeah, no school should be teaching that a race or one of the sex or one of the many sexes is inherently superior to another, but we've seen this, where that's the stated intent, but then people use it to go a step further and not teach like accurate histories. It's because teachers either are knowingly doing it, or districts are forcing teachers to steer away from certain topics, or they're just afraid. Even if they want to teach, they're afraid if they say something about, say, slavery in this country, and that a student goes home and says it made them feel bad for being white, the teacher could get in trouble. Now the school could get in trouble and might not be able to get funds for a particular program or whatever because of something like that. And that's where the problem comes in, and that's what the plaintiffs were trying to argue in court. Now, despite ruling against that, in Lydon's opinion, she said that these issues that were raised are indeed important to the public, but because of the lack of what they felt in this case, it was an argument about free speech. It was an argument involving the Constitution, and Lydon believed there was no standing in the Constitution for this argument. But as I said, they did mention, hey, these are still important to the public, we can't rule on this. There's no standing in the Constitution for this, but it should be decided by the democratic process, just not the federal court system. So essentially saying these are things that should be voted on. The plaintiffs had expressed concern that the budget provision could chill classroom discussions about race, history, and social justice. But ultimately, the court found that these fears were too speculative to warrant judicial intervention. Which, this whole thing being put into place was based on speculative, schools are teaching this wild history where they're saying white people are bad or men are bad by nature. And that's not what's happening at all. It's just a true teaching of history. We've also seen this with discussions of gender in the LGBTQ community. It's all based on the speculative stuff that wasn't happening. And now they're saying that the fears of them overcorrecting, even though there's no correction to be made, but going too far in the other direction, like actually doing those things. But okay. So unfortunately, we're going to see some of the stuff we've been seeing where teachers may be afraid to teach certain topics. Or the school outright just won't let them even have access to materials that will show honest history and or prevent them from talking about current events and things of that nature. All right, let's get some good news, on this end of the episode here. The Late Show with Stephen Colbert won its first ever Emmy on Sunday, just less than 2 months after news of the show's cancellation. You may remember, number one, Stephen Colbert, Charleston native. Well, I think technically he was born in Washington, D.C., but moved here when he was very, very young and spent, essentially his entire childhood here and still lives here. So that's the one reason we're talking about it. But yes, the show was also canceled. It was controversial because it seemed that perhaps CBS was capitulating to Trump, and they had a deal, merger that they were working on, and they felt maybe if they did something like this, this is the alleged, they've never actually said this is why they canceled Colbert's show, but it was thought that, maybe they canceled it because he's been so critical of Trump, and they thought that would help get their merger across the finish line, which, lo and behold, the merger did get across the finish line. But in any event, that's why we're talking about it. And his program won during Sunday's Creative Arts Emmys in the category of Outstanding Directing for a Variety Series. I should note the Righteous Gemstones also won an Emmy in the category of, it involves stunts. I forget the official title, forgive me, but basically like great job with stunt direction. So congrats to them. That show filmed here in the Charleston area, in case you didn't know that. So hats off to, shows with Charleston ties. That's really cool. And if you're wondering, didn't Colbert already win some awards? He's won a lot of awards, which is true. He has. And yes, he himself has actually won 10 Emmy Awards. But this was the first time that The Late Show had brought back an Emmy. He had previously been on like the Colbert Report for many years on Comedy Central, and was able to win Emmys through that. But this was the first time The Late Show with CBS won one. And that'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for coming back to the show. I really appreciate it. Speaking of, the next show will be on Friday. I'm already looking forward to it. But before I sign off, I have to say thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Soundsystem for producing this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio, and Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every show. As I said, already looking forward to speaking with you later this week. But until then, good night and good luck.